Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Bradley Kawaguchi. With Mr. Bradley, we will go through a journey from convict to musician, parent, and DJ. Mr. Bradley, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
Thank you for having me.
On December 31st, 2023, you wrote a statement.
Yeah.
And you decided to share it with your friend in social media. You don't mind sharing with us what was the content of that statement?
For sure.
How was the process of writing it, and why you decide to share it on social media with your friends?
Well, it was New Year's Eve, and I was really gotten in my, thinking a lot about, that year, 2023 in particular. And as I started thinking further back, it's like, wow, you've been, out of prison now for 23 years. And it wasn't an easy thing to get to where I'm at today. And at the same time, earlier that day, I'd been seeing a lot of people on Facebook complaining about the new year, same garbage and all of that. And I'm like, wait a minute, friends, there's something better here. And you've just got to put your mind to it. So I decided to finally, a lot of people know I have a history, but didn't know all the graphic details of it, so to speak. And that was me in 1997 through early 2000. About a year after my dad died, I discovered heroin. And I wasn't shooting it, I was snorting it. So I was able to hide my habit by not having marks on my arms. Only thing you would really realize, one of my friends saw me right before I got arrested. And she's like, dude, you look terrible. You've lost too much weight. And it couldn't have been more than a couple of weeks later that I'd gotten locked up. I was in a stolen car with drugs, all sorts of stuff. And there was no way of getting out of it because I'd already been arrested twice for heroin possession. And at that point, the judge had no choice but to incarcerate me. And looking back at it, it was the best thing that actually could have happened. And I had a really lenient judge. And when I say lenient, he followed the rule of the law, but gave me an opportunity, and even said so in the first court cases. Like at my deposition and hearing, you're smarter than this. You should use the tools that you're going to have in front of you or near you for the next couple of months to possibly help yourself. And I didn't know quite what he meant, or I just thought he meant go down to the law library and research my cases, which I did. And his advice was, pretty spot on, because the state had offered me 12 years to start with. And with good time and all that, I would have served 6. But because he prompted me to go, research things, basically, I found out that because of my crimes prior, that I was already a convicted heroin addict, that my cases now fell under a different statute of the law. I think it was like 730 ILCS 165 or something. I almost remember but it said because I was a habitual drug offender and the crimes I had committed back then, I was under the influence of narcotics. I had to be now sentenced as an addict and a habitual drug user, which meant that 12-year sentence now got busted down to the minimum sentence. And with that, the public defender's like, what do you really want? And I knew I didn't want to go to prison for any extended period of time, even though I should have. But at my age, I was eligible for what the Illinois Department of Corrections offers with boot camp. And it's a 4-month program, maybe 2 or 4 months, where you're treated like you're in the military, but with no real rights. So you have to follow all the rules, go through it all, and then you get paroled out for anywhere from 2, up to, like, I want to say 8 years is the maximum. And I got paroled with 2 years, with 2 years of parole time. And I followed every role I did there, got through it. It wasn't the easiest, mind you, because the correctional officers in the boot camp are there to make you make mistakes, to make your life as hard as possible. So when you go back out into the real world, you've just been screamed at by some guy. You should be able to handle it with your eyes closed. Anything that all of those habits, be it drugs, be it regular things you would do that led you to get to there, they're trying to break you of. And I wouldn't necessarily say they broke me of it, but they made sure I knew what I could do and what I should be doing. And so I got out in June of 2003, and literally I had $50 of money from the penitentiary and the clothes on my back. And if it weren't for a couple of really good friends and my aunt who helped me at the time, I probably would have wound up right back in there, or I'd have been homeless. But my aunt helped me get a single room apartment in downtown Chicago, directly. And here was the kicker. The only one we could afford for myself was directly across from MCC, Metropolitan Correctional Center. So every day when I would walk out of this men's only hotel, I would look at that and see it. And knowing that, it kind of gave me the motivation to, one, get out of the SRO and do whatever it took to not fall backwards into my steps of being a dope fiend. And I wasn't where I was living, I wasn't very far from where I used to get my drugs and all of that. So it really made me have to focus in on what was important. And those first few months were not easy. I mean, it was harder than having to figure out how to float my habit every day. It was, wondering, okay, I've only got $10 to my name. I have to get to and from work 3 more days this week. That gives me $3 basically. I guess I'm going to have to figure out how to eat. And luckily, when you leave prison, they do give you some resources, not a lot, but if you really look at them and pay attention to them, you can make them work for you. And they tell you where you can get free clothing. And there's a certain point, I'm just out. You need to swallow any bit of pride you ever had, become a humble individual. And don't get me wrong, I've been cocky a lot and arrogant about a lot of things I've done in my life. But being there and being, coming back from being stripped of all of your humanity, everything I owned prior to that, out, and a friend of mine got a few of my little bits and pieces and trinkets back for me from my apartment that when I went away, and gave them to me, but I had nothing. And to come back from that, I really had to think about everything I'd done and what was the best plan of attack or best way for me to get my life on track. And one of the things that NA and AA, the big book, taught you, and it came up in a conversation with a friend earlier today, that one thing at a time. You can't be overwhelmed by looking at everything in front of you and going, how do I accomplish this? So the first thing I did was get overemployed. And I had a day job, which was working at a credit consumer counseling company. And I was their collection agent of all, because before I went to prison, I was working for a collection agency, making a lot of money, but making that much money enabled my drug habit. So again, I had to keep all that in mind. And I was making good money right out the gate there. And what came up in our conversation earlier was idle time leads down that path of going to do something stupid. And so rather than have the idle time, I decided to figure out how to work every day of the week for every moment I could be awake, legitimately, without overdoing it. So by the time late 2003 came around, I was back working for Michael and Katie at the Heart. And I was only bartending a part-time, a couple days a week, opening shifts. I had a regular job with the collection company. And I was working at my friend's record store a few days a week because I missed being around music. And I'd worked at a record store from the time I was 15. They hired me early because my dad said, cool, until I was 26, 27, off and on. So working with Wilbur kind of helped me, because he saw me go through the decline of being a junkie, from being, a fit athlete to going to be a junkie, and help me come back from it. And I really wish he was here today to see where I'm at. but he passed away probably almost 10 years ago now. But he helped me. He was one of the key things that helped me get my footing back and made me realize that as I got older, there's a better way of life. Same with Michael and Katie at the Heartland. They kind of showed me one undying love for humanity and one's person. It didn't matter who you were, what you were, any of it. And since they've known me literally since I was 2 or 3 years old, they showed me, almost parental love, mentorly love, and kind of let me loose on Rogers Park once again. And when that happened in my, at the Red Line Tap, when it was my father's, I was snorting cocaine like it was going out of style, drinking fifths of tequila with my dad until he passed. So I was very out of control. And don't get me wrong, when I went back to working behind the bar, I quit drinking for a while when I got out of prison. I did. I started off, putting booze away. And I'm like, yeah, I can't do this. I'm not feeling good. And it's taking me away from doing what I should be doing, which is finding my own place, getting my life back in order. And so by December of that year, I had found myself in a really unique position, working for them with a band that was actually doing decently. And I'd gotten myself a cute little 1-bedroom apartment. And at that point, yeah, I probably went another 6-8 months and then started drinking again, which was probably, I needed to do it and get it out of my system, so to speak. And I didn't do that until my daughter was almost 3 years old when I really backed off, 3.5 years old when I backed off drinking to not drinking it at all, to where I'm at now. I might have 1 or 2 every now and then, but I know better. Like, I don't have the time for it. And I guess that came with the maturity of being 50, going on 51 and doing what I'm doing now as a DJ, that if people are paying me upwards of $2,000 and more to execute one of the biggest days of their lives, I can't be hungover. I can't let anything at all deter from me doing everything in my potential or my possibilities to make their day as perfect as I can. And being back in the wedding DJ thing, it actually taught me this huge lesson that I didn't understand very well when Michael and Katie would try to teach it to me at the Heartland or show it to me. I understood it and probably took it more for granted then than I do now. I was DJing a wedding, and this is when being a wedding DJ changed from being just a job to pay the bills to something a whole lot more. And being in Wisconsin, there's a lot of bikers up here, lots of them. Every summer you can see Harleys. I'm looking out my front door and seeing them go everywhere. And biker gangs, the whole 9 yards go with it. And the stigma and preconceived notion that they're hard as nails, no love, no care, none of it. And so I'm DJing a wedding at one of my favorite venues, Celebrations on the River. And the father of this bride is this 300+ pound, big, like 6'5", shaved head, big goatee biker. And up until there, and I'm sure I was hungover that day because I know I had a club gig the night before, but I'm watching him dance with his daughter, and all of a sudden, and it's almost like it almost brings me tears to this day, but he's bawling on the dance floor. Like, one of the rawest human emotions is sorrow or tears. And these were tears of joy, but he was crying. And I never could fathom seeing a biker cry. And then it clicked. It's like, wait a minute. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are. This is love. And that whole love thing, like the concept of it, I still have a difficult time grasping from my father because he wasn't very love oriented. He was first generation Japanese in America, post, internment camps that America had. So the love thing wasn't a big factor in his life. So now, in my 40s, getting introduced to it and seeing this undying love that this father had for his daughter, it totally changed me and made me realize that I have a daughter, and everything I do, she's aware of. I mean, she's of the social media age, so she's on my TikTok page. And she'll be like, did they really do that at the bar last night, Dad? Yes, Mira, they did, blah, blah, blah. And so she knows what's going on. But I got to see, and now since she does know what's going on, I have to be the best example I can for her. And that I didn't understand that until I saw this dad crying for his daughter or with his daughter. And it just changed me. From that day forward, I understood the value and what someone's wedding day means, not just to the couple, but to everyone they're inviting, their parents for their spotlight dances. And this is the accumulation of their entire life to this day. And it really did change me and change how I approach my job today. So yeah, I'm a club DJ, do college clubs and dance clubs, but the other side of it is I do the love thing. And it's taken a long time. It took me from Michael and Katie to now to really grasp it, which has been a really great thing in my life. And that's kind of why that day on New Year's Day Eve, when I was seeing all my friends' posts, I'm not happy, blah, 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 blah. Hey, fam, you know what? Here's from me to you. There's something better out there for each of us, but we have to work for it. You have to have faith, not only in if you're, definitely within yourself, your abilities, and the confidence to work with your abilities, but also if you believe in God, as I do. I may not be a practicing Catholic anymore. I'm not in church every Sunday, and that's another thing I got from prison was faith in the Lord above. And I have faith, things that have happened in my life, there's no other explanation for it except God was looking out for me. And with weddings, with, being blessed, knock on wood, I'm booking out into 2026 right now. And I'm one of the few DJs in my market, or part of the state, mind you, that is doing that. So, and reading in the Bible years ago, it's like God will help you, but you have to help yourself. You have to invest as much of yourself into what you want to get what you want out of it. And so that's why I came up with that. I put it up there. I'm like, you can be better. And, going from days that I wouldn't eat, or I had a box of cereal to last all week as my only meal, I knew I had to work harder and eventually work smarter along with that to get to where I am today.
So basically, by listening to you, what I'm learning is your viewpoint is we all can go through challenges, but instead complaining, you must find a ways to take action and keep on doing things you believe in. And hopefully in the future, things can get better. And if even though even things doesn't get better, you will learn during the process. And I think it's quite an interesting lesson we can take from your journey. The other day, I was Googling and I see a city named Kawaguchi in Japan. Are your parents from Kawaguchi or from Japan?
My grandparents were from Japan. And in 1901, my grandfather came.
When did your
However,
grandfather came?
yeah, from
When
Japan
did
here.
they came here when?
1901
Oh,
is when my
1901.
grandfather came.
Okay.
And then my grandmother came over in 1918.
Mhm.
And the name Kawaguchi is cut in that era is kind of like the last name Smith in America. So back in that era, it was a very common last name. Mind you, where they came from was in the mountains. They were farmers in the mountain areas of Japan. So that's all I really knew about them prior to getting here. And then when they came here, my grandfather bought a lot of land and they were farmers here in America on now what's like I want to say a 5 or 8 mile stretch of the Los Angeles highway. But during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese Americans were all stripped of their rights, stripped of their land and their possessions, and interned in camps, they lost everything. And in the camps, my grandfather died of a heart attack. And with that, one of my uncles who used to own what's now Rogers Park Social, from the late 50s, early 60s until my uncle Gabby passed in 1991, it was Helen and Gabby's. And so at the time, my uncle Gabby was serving in the U.S. Army during World War II and actually had to come home to the internment camp to bury his father for the funeral. And back then, it was a Japanese, I don't know other cultures, but it was a Japanese tradition that the entire congregation of the funeral would line up for a picture behind the casket. And my Uncle Gabby had to be at that funeral in his full dress U.S. Army uniform. And in every one of the pictures, you can see his head is turned away from the camera. And to this day, I still believe he was embarrassed that he had to wear his uniform to bury his father in the camp that the U.S. Army the U.S. had set forth for his family.
I see. So your father basically grew up inside the camp?
His first 3.5, 4 years were inside the camp.
How was his experience? Did he have the chance to share it with you?
Bits and pieces of it. They had schools, they had things to do, but you were stuck. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't see the world except for, and they were in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, which is in northern Wyoming. Not a lot to do around there. There's nowhere to go and nothing to see. It's the Great Plains states. So he said he didn't like it, obviously, but the only thing that kept him was close to his family. And so after World War II, when everybody was released from the internment camps, a lot of Japanese Americans went to the Midwest because there were opportunities without a lot of the West Coast racism that was out, that the rest of the nation did share in over Pearl Harbor. But even holds true as now, Chicago is still a very democratic, very welcoming, very open city, similar to New York City. And so they came from Heart Mountain to Chicago and settled in the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park and stayed there through the late 60s, early 70s. And then my grandma moved up to Wrigleyville, and her building that she lived in until she got too old to take care of herself is still there. And I passed by it the last time I went to Chicago. No, just to trip down memory lane, so to speak. But they spent their entire time, after that, on the north side of Chicago. My uncle opened at Helen and Gabby's. My uncle talked my dad into buying what's now, what was the Red Line Tap, which became the Red Line Tap, I should say. And so they owned bars on Glenwood and were very close. So I grew up, really not able to get away with anything outside because the two of them owned bars and my dad and uncle knew everybody on the block. So I saw when my dad found out I was smoking cigarettes from one of his friends, were like, yeah, we saw your kid walking down the street smoking. So my dad comes home, he's like, yo, give me a Marlboro. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you've been caught, kid. Give me a cigarette. And my dad hadn't smoked for almost 10 years at that point. And sadly, he started smoking again because of me. It's like, I quit because you had asthma. You've outgrown your asthma and you're smoking now. Forget this. I'm smoking now. And that was my bad play into him. But yeah, I was always surrounded by my family.
I see. So were you born in Chicago?
Yep. I was born in Chicago, Ravenswood Hospital, which is over on Ravenswood and Wilson, or was. And we lived directly across the train tracks on the other side of Glenwood until I was 7 years old. So Rogers Park, I was born and bred there. And I will kind of call Rogers Park like my leaving Rogers Park after my dad died as the biggest step into me becoming a drug addict and junkie. Because when I was in Rogers Park, everybody's eyes were on me. I didn't want to be that big of a taboo screw up with a drug habit. So not living in Rogers Park, I was able to get away from everybody's eyes and do my own thing, which led me down the wrong way.
I see. So in Rogers Park, you were part of community. Basically, you live among a community where everybody is looking for each other and trying to
Exactly.
um, give the best advice. But how was it growing up as a Japanese American?
Being second generation, I only remember bits and pieces of some of the racism that we saw up until about 81 or 82 was the last time I really remember it. And it was we were eating at Bulgogi restaurant, which was now basically the main theater or the Morris Theater or whatever that theater is. There was a restaurant in the far right next to the alley there. And the guy was obviously intoxicated and started just talking trash, like any of the stereotypical Asian slang, derogatory slang. He was just throwing it at the people in the people working there. And finally, my dad got up and he's like, "Look, dude, I don't care what you got to say about any of us, but not in front of my kid." Which also taught me a valuable life lesson about parenting. But and the guy wouldn't stop. And it was the first time I'd ever seen my dad fight anybody. But my dad decided that, nah, you're going to get up on me and do this. And wound up really issuing a beatdown on the guy inside the restaurant. And back in that era, because of who my dad was over there, he owned the Roys, my uncle owned Helen and Gabby's. They were kind of the corner pieces of the entire bar strip there. So what they kind of said went. You didn't go against it. And yeah, my dad he got a small, I want to say like misdemeanor, battery charge or something. But it really showed me what was out there from the bygone era of what we now call the boomer era. And honestly, didn't see much of it in Chicago as we went past the 80s. It became, because if you remember in TV back then, it became all about rap stars, rap artists, Compton, and the focus of different demographics that were racist now focused on that. And that's been a constant since. And I didn't really, being in Rogers Park, it wasn't that bad. You didn't see it very often. Because when I grew up, and I think it still holds true now, Rogers Park is one of the most diverse communities in the world. Because you have people from every country you can think of there. So growing up with everyone, it didn't, white, black, Hispanic, it didn't matter. We were all part of our own community. I had no ill will towards anyone for any of that, and didn't get reintroduced to it until I moved up here to Wisconsin. And and I don't know how to, it's not everywhere up here by all means. And living in La Crosse, I mean, you definitely see it when the people from the smaller communities come into town for the weekend to party and do all that. But La Crosse is slightly diverse, definitely not as close to anything Chicago would ever be, but it has diversity because of the Vietnam era American relocation of the Hmong community. And there is a huge Hmong community here in La Crosse. And first time I came up here with my daughter's mom when we were still dating, we went to the mall. And it was winter, and I had never seen outside, a couple Asian folks here or there all dressed up for winter. And we were up there, I'm like, wow, wait, I see the whole Hmong populace that's up here. I'm like, it was surreal to me because I'd never actually seen many Asian people like bundled up for winter. And it took me differently. And I'm like, okay, I could probably manage living up here. If they can make it up here and have since the late 70s, it can't be as bad as my preconceived notion of a small town is. And yeah, I mean, it's up here. You'll go out to the small towns, and there's a lot of. I'm not trying to say it's everyone because there are a lot of really good people up here, and there's a couple of those people up here that have really made me embrace the wedding, like embracing the love aspect of the DJ thing or the love for my daughter and not being a jerk. It took me years to realize that you'll hear it all the time. You can't get any, you can get more more out of people with sugar than anything else.
I see.
And being nice wasn't because my dad didn't show me that growing up. He grew up in a very racist era. So it was very, very warm to the people he loved, but to everyone else outwardly, he was a cold, bitter, harsh man. And that's what I grew up with raising me. He showed me love, but also showed me you have to be tough. You have to be a man. Like Dennis Leary jokes about it in his skit, his comedy album, No Cure for Cancer, that his dad chops his thumb off, duct tapes it on, and goes back to it. And that was the image I had of what being a man was from my dad. So, one, even still trying to live up to that in my own head, I have to give up. But it definitely didn't give way to me being a super outwardly nice person until I've gotten to this point in my life.
I see. So, as a Japanese American, you grew up in Roses Park in a very diverse community. Did you have the chance to go to school and finish school? And if you didn't finish school, why you didn't?
I didn't finish college. I had a semester of college and I went to school because my dad had that bar. And like I said, in the 70s and 80s, those two bars were making money hand over fist and kind of controlling the entire bar circuit over there. My dad paid for me to go to a very private school. And it was when I graduated, and I went from nursery until 8th grade. It was what they like to call a parochial or private school, uniforms, super small classrooms. My 8th grade class had 7 people in it. So you got very good education, very one-on-one, hands-on, one-on-one time with your teacher. They could identify all your weak points. And my biggest weak point was I just didn't like to study. I liked to play and have a good time. And the other part, they try to skip me in grades numerous times, thinking that I was just bored with school because it was easy. I wouldn't do well on my assignments, but I would test out of everything with perfect scores. I could pay attention in class, not do anything else, and realize I could maintain a C and a B average by not turning in homework. And the school getting on my case, having my dad come down once a week to complain to him that I wasn't doing homework didn't work. And so it was also a time when I was in karate and playing hockey. And dad held all of it over my head. You don't want to do your schoolwork? Guess what? You're not going to play. And that's what he's like. And I thought he was just being a jerk. And I'm like, he was like, no, son, if you want to play in high school, if your grades are not up to snuff, they kick you off the team until you can get your grades up. I didn't believe it, but anyway, I passed with 8th grade on honor roll, all fine, and got accepted into what was one of the top high schools in the state of Illinois. Again, all private, which was Loyola Academy out in Wilmette. So I didn't get subjected to all the BS in the public schools at the time. On the flip side of that, because we weren't rich white folks, we got me and a few of my friends like Pete Wolf, who hosts In One Ear, who used to hang at Heartland all the time. He went to high school with me. And actually, Pete and I went to North Shore School, all of our education. And at Loyola Academy, he graduated from there. I did not. But because we were city boys and not suburbanites, there was the class system there. That if you weren't a star football player, star basketball player, or star hockey player from the city, you were treated like a second-class citizen. And by sophomore year, I bought into it. And because at the time I was hanging out in the punk rock area of Chicago, and being a Japanese American kid, again, I sought out places that, people in places that just didn't care who I was. They were more concerned about who I was inside than what I looked like and who I was racially. So I wound up hanging out with the punk rockers and the anti-racist skinheads in Chicago down at Clark and Belmont. So in the mid to late 80s, I'm running around with a two-fin mohawk, leather jacket, going to a Jesuit college preparatory high school and being just frowned upon by priests, teachers, the whole 9 yards. So by going into senior year, they wouldn't let me go there for senior year. They were done with me. I was a disciplinary case from what they said. They didn't like, I wore combat boots all the time with steel caps. And back then you wore steel cap combat boots because if you're going to get into a fight with somebody, you could potentially hurt them worse than just a regular kick. So I was all punk rocked out and didn't care about any of that. So I wound up going to Sullivan High School for 1 year, and I was so bored my senior year there. I passed, but it wasn't with flying colors. I had a C and B average when I should have been A+ across the board in all my seniors honors classes. But I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to go to school anymore. And I had a part-time job at the Record Exchange, which used to be on Morris. And that's when I was really delving into music and got into music hardcore, was working at the Record Exchange because I had 3 of the most knowledgeable music people I was working with. And again, music doesn't show love or hate, it's just music. And getting to surround myself in it all was like, this is great, which really laid a great foundation, which I didn't utilize until I really became a full-time DJ again. But yeah, I was able to just dive into any type of music possible that I really got into. And Joe at the Morris store turned me on to so much jazz and gave me a great foundation for the jazz I found I really liked. Wilbur at the Belmont shop, he helped me turn into a DJ when I was DJing at Medusa's in Chicago when I was 17 or 18. And a good friend of mine who I'm still really good friends with, Leroy, thank you so much. But he was the one who said, hey, DJ, why not? I'm going to take off for a little while, have fun, do all ages. And it turned into me moving down to the main strip on Division Street, Chicago for a couple of years. But it plays into why I didn't go to college. I knew out of high school I didn't want to go right away. I wanted to have some fun, and I was working full time. I had the job at the record shop. I was DJing, working a few nights for my dad at the bar. It's like I'm in my 19, 20, 21. I'm making money hand over fist. I don't need to go to college. But then my dad got sick. And when I was really stewing about going back and was taking my first semester, he was diagnosed with chronic renal failure, kidneys, liver, and pancreas. And it's also what now at 50, I don't party like I used to. But it made me take a step back and go, my dad's like, I think I need your help. And this is coming from the guy who was a man I looked up to. He was the most manly person, not most manly, but he taught me to be a man. And now he's asking for my help. At that point in time, and it was, obviously there's the love factor of that. I love my father. But because he had inbred me so hard, and at the same time, my grandma had gotten sick, gotten old, and we had to figure out what to do with her. And she was in a assisted living home, but now she needed full-on care with that. So I'm doing what I saw as my duty to the Japanese family. That you take care of your family no matter what. You are insignificant in your family. You are a member of the entire machine. And when they start falling ill, it is your job and your duty to take care of them to the best of your abilities. So I quit DJing downtown. I gave up working at the record shop and only worked for my dad's bar and taking care of my dad and my grandma until 1995. And at that point in 95, I had a really bad cocaine habit. I was engaged to be married. Her and I were just terrible people. All I did was drink, party, shoot pool. I was on, if I'd stayed on that path like I did through that and the junkie thing, I'd be dead by now. But through all of it, I had to take care of my father. And then September or October of 1996, my aunt from California finally said, okay, I will take grandma, my dad and aunt's mom, and she'll move in with me. And I was only had to take care of my dad. Shortly after that, my grandma did pass. And I think it was on New Year's Day, 1996. And at the time, because my dad and I had been partying so hard, we didn't have a home phone. We only had beepers. And it's still hard for me to remember this, but yeah. I had to be the one to tell my dad his mom died. So I had to go down to the bar, figure out who called, and then go back home and tell my dad, hey, grandma passed. Mm-hmm. And earlier that year, he'd lost his other brother. So it was 1, 2, and 3 right in a row. And shortly after my grandma passed, April of that same year, I lost my dad. And I found out he took his own. I mean, I put it together, I should say. He didn't tell me. No one had to tell me. But everything added up to my dad took his own life with drugs. There was no way for him to come back.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. And don't get me wrong, I can still remember the day like it happened yesterday. Finding him and all that, but I never blamed him. I'm not mad at him. He was truly in pain. And when I went through everything, he did things that were normally completely out of character. All of our bills were paid. Everything was caught up. So all I had to do was go to the bank, close the account, and do everything. Put the application in for the new liquor license and all. And I still didn't learn my lesson. I kept drinking. I backed off cocaine for a little while. And then when my now ex-wife and I got married, she was pregnant. And a couple months later, she had a miscarriage and we broke up, basically. And it led me on a further downward spiral to becoming a junkie. And all of this was not typical in the Japanese community. And similarly to my father, I kind of became the black sheep of my Japanese family. Didn't talk to any of them, didn't see them. And I'm sure they didn't want to see me in the shape I was in. It was a sad, sad sight. There's nothing good I can say about my life in that era, except the learning I got out of it, that I can look back on it and go, this is what you don't do anymore.
Do you think you were too young to handle all those crises by yourself?
Definitely. I mean, well, yes and no. Did it make me a stronger person and make me a more capable person as an adult who can understand and appreciate it? By all means. But did it drive me to do things heavier drinking, heavier drug use? Most definitely. And back in the 90s and 80s, mental health as it is now, you're a man. You don't talk about that. You deal with it. You suck it up. You be a man. And that's all I ever learned from it. And bringing it full circle to that post I made. In order for myself to maybe heal and move on and be better, sharing that, maybe somebody else will learn from it and I can help them. And by turn helping them, they will help me as well. Which is something we didn't have back in the 80s, 90s, and even into the early 2000s. People really didn't start focusing on mental health care in the mediums we are now until the early, 2010, 2011. And even more so post-COVID because of everybody being stuck at home, not being able to do things and incapable of coping with everything. And yeah, my coping mechanisms back then were awful because I went to the bottle, I went to drugs. One may say my coping mechanism now of just bombarding myself with nonstop work and everything I do so I don't get free time like the average person is not a great way of coping with how I feel about things either. But I understand that there's certain sacrifices I have to make in order to not fall backwards. And if and also try to be better about myself and what I'm doing every day. So in order to make sure I get through everything, this is the path I've chosen to stay, keep my head clean and take care of my daughter the best I can. By far, I wish I could think of a better way to manage my time with it all, but it's keeping me clean and sober. And not necessarily clean and sober, but it's not leading me back down that road to go drink and party. So yeah, there might be better ways to handle it, but this is the thing I've kind of figured has been best for me.
I see. Can you just take us back at your first day of encountering drug and drinking? Did you have any kind of thought behind your mind, what I'm doing is not good? Or you just say, this is the solution for me and I have to do it?
See, in the 70s, when I was growing up, and being in my father and uncle being in the bar business, drinking, drugs, alcohol abuse, it all seemed normal. I was surrounded by it. So when my dad's friends would all go out to picnics, softball games, I was 6, 7 years old watching people smoke joints, snort cocaine. And maybe I shouldn't have seen it. And like some of it, I may have walked in the wrong room to. But to me, it was the norm. Like, have you ever seen the movie Goodfellas? When Ray Liotta's character is saying, this just, like all the mob guys, being around them all the time, doing their thing, talking about hits and all that. It was just the norm. It's what you grew up with. It's what you thought was an atypical life. I didn't know there was any different life until my mom, it had to be 20 years after my mom left my dad and I'd gotten out of prison and understood why my mom went sober. I understood why that some people had to do it. When she did it and my mom and dad split up and I went to live with my dad, I thought my mom was nuts. I'm like, why would you give up having all this fun? What's wrong with you? But in hindsight, and it's what I'm trying to kind of embrace what my mom taught me now, work your ass off every day. My dad did too, but my dad had a lot of fun doing it. And I guess, where I'm at with everything is, can you have your cake and eat it too? Not totally, but there's a happy medium to both. Being able to have a fun job, but making sure you take care of your business. But I mean, when you said, like, what do I remember about drugs and knowing it's wrong? Cocaine I knew was wrong. And when my dad got busted for dealing cocaine when I was 14, he missed my 8th grade graduation. Whatever, so be it. But he had to have that talk with me. Son, I do things. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah, Dad, I've known you smoke pot. I know you do cocaine. I know you drink. Whatever. I know cocaine and weed are illegal. Is it going to stop me? Probably not. Because by the time I was 16, I was smoking pot pretty heavily. And I was taking acid or mushrooms at the time too. Because of, hanging around the Heartland Cafe at that era in the late 80s. A lot of their bartenders were the 90s type hippie kids. Early 20s, I was late teens. They're like, oh, that's Roy's kid. He can do whatever. So I was getting, but that was back then. So I didn't have no, this is not a good thing. And when I really realized that I'd screwed up in it all and had gotten to the ultra taboo of it all was when I did heroin. And it's no lie. The first time you do it, you will probably get hooked. It's that potent, that strong. but you will take the rest of the time you're doing that drug chasing that high because you will never obtain that again. And it took me going to prison to learn that and having to look back at it going, yeah, you got that first high and never saw that feeling again. To know that's not the path I want to go to.
I see.
So yeah, that was the tabooism of heroin is when I really realized you're in the wrong here.
So,
and yeah.
So basically, drug was a factor that completely changed your life from a teenager who have a full-time job playing music to somebody who have to take care of his family, his dad.
Yeah.
And after that, you end up in jail. How was jail? Can you give us a description and a process on how is the life in jail for people who don't know about jail?
If you've never been, you don't want to go. And I was that idiot that didn't think it would be that bad. Figured I had to, and I had to learn for myself. Cook County Jail is the most vile, disgusting place I can still picture on earth. The penitentiary, night and day. Cook County Jail is filthy and dangerous. And not just dangerous in the fact you can get hurt in a fight. The building is run down. It is just because of overpopulation, overcrowding. If a fire were to happen in that side of that place, I rest assured not everybody's going to get out. Fighting in the day room, all the fighting, all the BS. I got ringworm there. Just from sitting in there, I had ringworm and had to get antibiotics for a month or 10 days. And the sad thing is, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s when I was there, the city of Chicago police and county police in every jurisdiction that feeds into the Cook County jail system are so racist. Even to the utmost potential of the word. And I don't know how to really you can describe it in the fact that everybody who they were locking up were either Mexican or African American. And I should say Latin or African American. 2, maybe 3% white people. I'm putting myself in the white category for lack of a better term. And part and parcel, how everyone says it's just that community on the south side or the west side. Yes, it is that community because they are underserved by our current government. I befriended somebody when I was in prison, and his name was Terrell Collins. I remember that to this day. He was 18 years old at the time, headstrong, cocky, thought he knew it all. But he could not read at all. The word and, A-N-D, he could not read that out of a book. And when I started helping him read because we were bunkmates or cellmates, it was like the system has let you down in every way, shape, or form possible. They have done you everything wrong. And I would fully contend the kid was bright, had a good head, and he knew how to, he knew how to count to make his money on the street dealing. He knew how to, he was street smart. He had a brain. And there were a lot of guys I ran into in the penitentiaries like that I wonder if they were given the same opportunities like I had. And I hate to say it, I had a silver spoon in my mouth. I got the best my dad could possibly give me. If they were given even a third of the opportunity I had, what would have happened to them? But that is what the Cook County jail system was completely comprised of. Now, don't get me wrong. There are cats that deserve to be in there because they have no care about human life or their fellow man. And there's some that just didn't know any better. Like I didn't know any better about not doing drugs and drinking. That's all I grew up knowing. That's what I'm going to follow until I learn different.
I see.
Those folks, that I was locked up with, didn't get those opportunities, and that's where their life went. Don't get me wrong. I'm thankful for the opportunity I got in there because it taught me to be a better, not necessarily be a better person, but you are not great. And it almost, at a certain point, it also taught me to realize that in the general scope of my humanity, I am irrelevant. All of humanity, one individually, outside of our own circles, are irrelevant unless we're able to do something that profound and astounding, like people that win Nobel Peace Prizes, things like that. And when I really came to terms with that and said, okay, focus on what you can do for yourself, when I got out, that's when my life started to change.
I see. Can you take us to the daily life in prison? How the daily life look like?
You get up at 5 a.m. for count. When they shove you, they give you your breakfast, or you go get your breakfast at 5 a.m. You get it, you eat it, you go back to your cell. You're there until 9 a.m. They open your cells. Your cells are open until 11 a.m. They feed you lunch at 11. Then they send you back in your cell from noon until 3. And this is one of the tiers I can remember. From 3 to 4, you go down to the yard. 5 o'clock, you're back in your tier eating dinner. 8 o'clock, you're back in your cell. That was it. That was your day-to-day life, 7 days a week.
So,
no changes. And
based your own observation when you come to the demographic, as you emphasize, most of them was African Americans, Black, and Spanish. How was you able to live as a minority in that environment and be able to get out?
again, this is one of the things, and one of the reasons I always say God is looking over my shoulder. When I went to prison, I had a roommate who was a Latin king, Jose. And when we got caught, we were in the hot car, and I took the weight for everything. Because I knew if he got busted, he would be going to prison for a long time. But I knew I hadn't been to prison yet, and I was going down no matter what. There was no doubt about it. So as soon as I got in, he came and saw me and found out where I was. And what I also told him to do when we were getting taken away, I'm like, anything you need in my house, take it, sell it, make sure you can feed yourself, because I ain't going to get it back. So whatever you got to do to make sure you're covered. Because he was my roommate and my junkie brother, so to speak. We had each other's backs. He found out who was the top Latin king on my deck, who ran the tier. I'd been in there 3 days, and Gino comes and sees me. Goes to my cell door window, throws in a pack of cigarettes and some food, and he's like, no matter what you need, we got you. But that also meant if things started up in the tier, I had to fight with the kings. And yeah, I've got the marks to show for it. But I knew at that point I was covered. I would not have any problems because I was 5 foot. I'm 5'7" and I weighed 140 pounds. Anybody could roll over on me, but they had my back. And to this day, I'm thankful because they looked out for me until I got taken away from county and went to prison.
I see.
Other kids didn't have it like that.
Yeah. Eventually,
So
you got out from prison. Was it easy for you to adjust to real life after being many years in prison?
yeah, after 2 years in prison and being after 2 years of being locked up, because they have such a hardcore schedule, I was now able to get up, go to my, find a job, do my schedule, and follow that hardcore regimen of a schedule that I've taken with me 23 years later, 20 years later, rather. It's still with me. My schedule doesn't change day by day, every day. So I took that away and hold it dearly that my prison experience taught me several things that I'm still able to hold in my life.
So your life in prison can be seen in two sides. In one way, you end up there because of drug, which was kind of bad. But in
Yep,
other ways, the training you got from jail help you live a disciplined life after jail. Is it the way?
100%.
Yeah. So in prison, you were a number. Does it?
R16249.
Yes. Did that number follow you after prison?
No, no. Unlike a lot of these kids you see getting locked up, but because I had the good premise and a good foundation of an education before I became a junkie, and I knew how to do certain jobs, I knew where to go to get employment when I left prison. And that was going back to credit collections. I knew I'd get right in, get a job, and go. I did just that. And then took on more work after that. It was those skills from working for corporate places that did in fact teach me how to run my own business. So by doing that, before and after prison, I learned a lot about that and how to manage my time, manage my efforts, and work to progress properly.
But you went to jail, and after jail, you find yourself a new life, and you start working. But many people who went to jail end up back to jail. Why you think that?
Because if you don't change your mindset to be a better person and better what you are doing or are going to do, you are going to fall back to those same habits. Personally, as a person, you have to want to get better. You have to want for better. And that's my drive now. All of that BS that taught, I squandered 10 years, 15 years of my life, half my life on drugs and alcohol. I've lost out on precious time that I'll never get back, that now I'm scrambling to make up for, desperately trying to make up for, to leave a better life for my daughter.
I see.
So making all these sacrifices, like I'm gonna have to take off in about 5 minutes or so because I have to go to a gig. And my gig schedule today, I'm going to Stevens Point, then Green Bay, then I'm back in La Crosse for 2 gigs on Sunday. I work every moment I can to, one, show my daughter to get anywhere in life, you have to work hard. But 2, to show her I'm doing this for her and to give her everything she needs.
I see.
And so when she gets to be an adult, I hope that she can have this, what I'm showing her, and take that with her and be a good human.
Mr. Bradley, thank you very much for sharing your time.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation because today you are a dad and you have a profession you like. And I would love to learn more about you being a dad. What are you teaching to your daughter?
Sure.
What's your bad experiences help you be a better dad. And of
For
course,
sure.
learning also about what being DJ and musician mean for you. Again,
For
thank
sure.
you. Go ahead.
I totally love to do a second part of this. That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you very much then for
You're
joining me
welcome.
under the Human Rights Tree. And I will reach out in the near future so we can continue the journey.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.